Okay, so fertilizer. Not exactly a topic you bring up at a dinner party, is it?
Right, not exactly the most riveting conversation starter.
But you know what? It's literally feeding the world. Think about it. Every bite of food, every grain of rice, it all comes back to fertilizer. And where there's a multi-billion-dollar industry, well, you're going to find some pretty interesting characters, to say the least. Today, we're going deep on a guy named Andrey Guryev. You might not recognize the name right away, but this guy, this fertilizer tycoon, he embodies only in Russia moments like you wouldn't believe.
It's true, the fertilizer industry, it's kind of this under-the-radar world, but it's completely intertwined with everything. I mean, we're talking global food prices, international relations, you name it. And Andrey Guryev's story, it's a perfect lens, I think, to understand how this often overlooked industry really works.
All right, so picture this. 1960, the Soviet Union, it's in its heyday, right? And just outside Moscow, Andrey Guryev is born. Now, you might think, okay, future engineer, maybe a high-ranking bureaucrat in the making. But get this. Our guy, Andrey Yuk, he's got this unexpected passion, judo. And not just like casual judo, he was a judo master.
Yeah, not your typical background for, an oligarch, right?
Not at all. Speaks to those interesting twists and turns life takes, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. And for Guryev, it kind of foreshadows things, because that path from athletics, it eventually leads him to the world of finance. He ends up with an economics degree from the University of Greenwich, no less. And this is prime time because the Soviet Union's falling, everything's changing, and those who adapt, well, they often end up reaping the rewards.
And that's where we bump into a name that, well, let's just say he's a big deal in Russian history. Mikhail Khodorkovsky. We're talking the early 90s, Khodorkovsky's company, Menatep. It's riding the wave of this new era. And Guryev, he jumps right in, proving he's got some serious business chops. He climbs the ranks, eventually landing as chairman of Appetit, which was one of Menatep's big subsidiaries.
Yeah, and Appetit, this is where we start to see those fertilizer roots taking hold. This wasn't just any company. Appetit was a major, major supplier of apatite concentrate. Which, in case you're not up on your fertilizer ingredients, that's a key component of phosphate-based fertilizers. So Guryev, he's laying the groundwork, building his expertise in the industry that'll basically define his future, right?
Yeah.
And of course, building his fortune along the way.
Okay, now buckle up because this is where things get really wild. It's 2004, and Khodorkovsky, Guryev's old mentor, he gets arrested. Huge, huge scandal, a real showdown with Putin's government.
Yeah.
And what happens next? Well, Guryev ends up acquiring Khodorkovsky's shares of, and this name might ring a bell, PhosAgro.
And this was a turning point, not just for Guryev, but for Russia. You got to understand what was going on then. It was all about power, the government taking control of anything and everything, all those assets previously held by, well, let's be honest, by oligarchs, by private individuals. So the fact that Guryev, he not only survives this, but he thrives, raises some really, really interesting questions about his relationship, his ties with the Putin regime. It shows you how business and politics, they're inseparable, especially in that part of the world.
So just like that, Guryev's calling the shots at PhosAgro, one of the biggest, most important fertilizer producers on the planet. And he doesn't waste any time. He goes all in on consolidating his power, buying out other management figures left and right. Yeah. Strategic move after strategic move. And then in 2012, he pulls off this masterful management buyout of Appetit, remember them, comes full circle and gets total control of the company where his whole fertilizer journey began.
Classic vertical integration, isn't it? Yeah. Securing control, not just of making the fertilizer, but the entire process from start to finish. The raw materials, the production, the whole 9 yards. That kind of thinking, that's long-term vision. And you need that when you're building a global empire.
But it's like they say, right? It's lonely at the top.
Especially when you're building an empire.
Yeah. And for Guryev family, it's not just about, Sunday dinners. These are key players.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, we're talking serious family business here. His son, Andrey Guryev Jr., takes the reins as CEO of PhosAgro eventually, and Mrs. Guryev, let's just say she's got a comfortable seat at the table with a significant chunk of company shares. And this, by the way, it's not unusual, not at this level, especially when you're looking at companies that, they came up in these emerging markets. Having that family in control, it can bring stability.
Right, like we built this is ours. Dynasties, but with fertilizer instead of, palaces and crowns.
Right, well, about those palaces. Don't forget Guryev. He's got a taste for the finer things in life, shall we say, and his real estate portfolio. It's a little more, how should we say, a little more upscale than your average fertilizer tycoon.
Just a tad. We're talking Wittenhurst level upscale.
Yeah, Wittenhurst. I mean, even if you don't have London's luxury real estate market memorized, that name, It carries weight. It's not just that it's the second biggest house in the entire city, it's what it represents. We're talking only Buckingham Palace is bigger.
That should give you a sense of the scale. And let's not forget, there's the penthouse at St. George Wharf Tower, prime London real estate.
Of course, and no billionaire, fertilizer, or otherwise would be caught without a proper escape vessel. Word on the street is that yacht is something else too. But it does make you think, right? This level of wealth displayed so blatantly, it's a stark reminder of the disparities that exist in our world.
Yeah, the contrast is pretty hard to ignore. But that's the thing about wealth, about power. Geopolitics has a way of shaking things up. And for Guryev, that shakeup arrived in 2022. The war in Ukraine, the world reacts, and Guryev and his son, Andrey Jr., they find themselves on some rather exclusive lists.
Sanctions lists, to be precise. And these weren't just, a slap on the wrist. These were a big deal. Assets frozen, travel restricted, the whole nine yards. It really underscored how the international community, they viewed the Putin regime and, let's just say, anyone they thought was a little too close for comfort.
I can't help but wonder, when those sanctions hit, what was going through Guryev's mind? Was it a surprise? Or did he see it coming?
Who knows what goes on behind closed doors, right? But the sanctions themselves, they speak volumes. It goes back to that tangled web we were talking about. Money, politics, global events, it's all connected. And Guryev, well, he's kind of a living embodiment of that, isn't he?
It's like his story is a thread. And when you start pulling on it, you realize it unravels this whole tapestry of, I don't know, global power, wealth, intrigue, the whole thing. It makes you think about the fertilizer industry, this thing most of us probably never even consider, and yet here it is, front and center. It's easy to get caught up in the stories, the personalities, all the trappings of wealth and power. But when you look at Guryev's story, it makes you step back a bit, doesn't it?
It does, because we're talking about fertilizer, and yet it's essential.
Exactly. Most people, they probably go their whole lives without even thinking about where their food comes from, let alone the fertilizer that helped grow it.
That's the thing, isn't it? It's almost like this invisible force, right? But it's at the core of how we feed the planet. And then you have someone like Guryev, so ambitious, so connected, so incredibly wealthy, and it raises some big, uncomfortable questions, like who's really in control of these industries that are quite literally keeping us all alive? And what happens when those controls, well, when they're in the hands of people more interested in power than, the greater good?
It's that old saying, too much power, right?
Yeah.
But does it always work out that way? I mean, that's what I keep coming back to with Guryev. Is he just a really, really good businessman who played the game and won?
Yeah.
Or is there more to it? Especially when you factor in, well, everything about Russia, the political landscape, all of it. It's messy, complicated. And honestly, that's what makes it so interesting to unpack.
It's those loose ends, the unanswered questions that really stick with you. It's so easy to just go along with things, take information at face value. But Guryev's story, if anything, it's a reminder to dig deeper, Stay curious, because the truth is rarely simple. It's usually a lot more complicated, a lot more nuanced than we want to believe.
Isn't that the truth? So next time you're having dinner, maybe think about that plate of food in front of you, that whole journey it took to get there. And maybe, just maybe, you'll spare a thought for the fertilizer industry, the Andrey Guryevs of the world. They might be operating in the shadows, but their impact, it's everywhere.
It's all connected. Sometimes the most unexpected things, they lead to the most profound realizations.
Well said. And on that note, we'll wrap up our deep dive into the world of Andrey Guryev. From judo master to fertilizer magnate, it's been quite a ride. But hey, that's the deep dive for you. We'll be back next time with another story, another chance to explore those hidden corners of the world that, well, maybe we should be paying more attention to. See you then.